While everyone is busy with the Russo-Ukraine war, Pakistan and the Taliban have started a full-blown war. After a series of small skirmishes, on December 24th, Pakistan launched devastating airstrikes in Afghanistan's eastern border province. This attack killed several militants and senior Taliban officials in a massive show of military force, prompting the Taliban to react. Just 4 days later, on December 28th, the Taliban struck back with a fierce offensive, targeting multiple locations in Pakistan and killing some Pakistani troops. These actions have since triggered back-and-forth attacks between the two nations, escalating the conflict into a full-blown war in the Middle East. The craziest part of all this is the fact that Pakistan was one of the main backers of the Taliban in recent history, but now it seems these friends have turned enemies. As we speak, both Pakistan and Afghanistan have increased their military presence along the border, with troops consistently exchanging fire. Each of these parties feels justified, and with years of built-up tension boiling over, tensions have gone beyond the point of diplomacy. So today, let's go over the origins of this conflict between Afghanistan and the Taliban, how the relationship soured, and what this new all-out war means for the Middle East and the world as a whole. To fully understand these recent military clashes that are leading us to an all-out war in the Middle East, we need to take a step back and examine the deep history that Pakistan shares with the Taliban. To do so, we must go back to the 1980s, during the Soviet-Afghan War. During this period, Pakistan played a crucial role in supporting the Afghan Mujahideen, who were fighting against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. This was such a brutal conflict that other nations began to insert themselves into the conflict to preserve Afghanistan's independence and stop the Soviets from amassing more power. The United States and Saudi Arabia were providing significant financial and military support to the Mujahideen, with Pakistan serving as a channel for this aid, given that it was Afghanistan's neighbor. This was mainly conducted through the Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI, Pakistan's premier intelligence agency. This agency was also very instrumental in training and arming the Mujahideen in this war. This support system was part of Pakistan's broader strategy to counter Soviet influence in the region and to establish a friendly government in Afghanistan that would provide strategic depth against India, Pakistan's other neighbor. With all the support they were getting, the Mujahideens eventually defeated the Soviets in 1989. They forced Soviet forces to withdraw, marking what many thought would be a turning point in the region's geopolitics. Unfortunately, however, the end of the Soviet-Afghan War did not bring stability to Afghanistan. Soon after, the country descended into a brutal civil war as various Mujahideen factions vied for power. With the common enemy gone, everyone was now vying for leadership positions. It was in this chaotic environment that the Taliban emerged in the early 1990s. The Taliban, a militant Islamist group, quickly gained control of large parts of Afghanistan, promising to restore order and implement a strict interpretation of Islamic law. Instead of being alarmed, Pakistan saw the rise of the Taliban as an opportunity to achieve its strategic objectives in Afghanistan. The Inter-Services Intelligence began providing substantial support to the Taliban, including training, arms, and financial assistance. Pakistan's support was driven by several factors. Firstly, a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan was seen as a buffer against Indian influence in the region. India and Pakistan have a complex and hostile relationship that's rooted in historical and political events. With military conflict littered in their record books, Pakistan was ready to do anything to limit India's influence in the region. Secondly, because of this ever-rising tension, Pakistan hoped that a stable and friendly government in Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, would provide it with support in the event of a conflict with India. In essence, they were leveraging a future debt that the Taliban would owe them. Thirdly, the Taliban's strict interpretation of Islam resonated with certain elements within Pakistan, particularly in the border regions. With all these factors propelling them, this investment in the Taliban yielded fruit as the group captured Kabul in 1996, and their establishment of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan marked the beginning of a new phase in Pakistan-Taliban relations. Given the bloody way in which they rose to power, the international community was hesitant to welcome them. But Pakistan was one of only 3 countries, along with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, to recognize the Taliban government officially. This recognition was a clear indication of Pakistan's support for the Taliban and its desire to see them succeed. However, the relationship between Pakistan and the Taliban was not without its challenges. The Taliban's harsh rule and their support for extremist groups, including Al-Qaeda, drew international condemnation. The 9/11 attacks in the United States, orchestrated by Al-Qaeda, led to a dramatic shift in global geopolitics. So when the US launched a military intervention in Afghanistan in 2001 to dismantle Al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban from power, Pakistan found itself in a difficult position. On one hand, it was a key ally of the United States in the war on terror, providing logistical support and intelligence cooperation. On the other hand, elements within Pakistan, particularly the ISI, continued to maintain covert ties with the Taliban. This dual policy created tensions between Pakistan and the US, with Washington accusing them of playing a double game. Eventually, the US-led intervention succeeded in toppling the Taliban government, but the group quickly regrouped and launched an insurgency against the Afghan government and coalition forces. Pakistan's tribal areas, particularly the federally administered tribal areas, or FATA, became a safe haven for Taliban fighters. The porous border between Pakistan and Afghanistan allowed militants to move freely between the two countries, complicating efforts to stabilize Afghanistan. Again, Pakistan allowed all this to happen under the umbrella of friendship, to try and bring peace to the region. Pakistan has played a significant role in facilitating peace talks between the Afghan Taliban and the United States. The signing of the Doha Agreement in 2020, which outlined a framework for the withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan, was a milestone in the peace process. Pakistan's involvement in these negotiations was seen as crucial, given its influence over the Taliban. After the withdrawal of US and NATO forces, the Taliban quickly took over Afghanistan in 2021. Establishing control and becoming the dominant government. Given everything we have been discussing, you would think this is the best outcome for Pakistan, but in reality, it hasn't been. Let me explain. Before we do that, your support for our content is always appreciated, especially when we cover controversial and war-related topics like this one. So please keep liking and sharing our content, as that greatly increases our reach and helps the channel. Right, back to it. Over the years, Pakistan's relationship with the Taliban has evolved. By strengthening the Taliban and its ideals, it also sowed the seeds of its own problems. This is where the Pakistan Taliban comes in. The Taliban-Pakistan, or TTP, is an umbrella organization of various Islamist militant groups operating along the Afghan-Pakistani border. Formed in 2007 by Baitullah Masood, the TTP's primary goal is to overthrow the Pakistani government and establish an Islamic State governed by their interpretation of Sharia law. This group has a complex relationship with the Afghan Taliban. While they share a common ideology and have assisted each other in various conflicts, they operate independently with separate command structures. The TTP draws its recruits primarily from the tribal belt along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, an area characterized by poverty, lack of education, and limited state presence. This environment has allowed militant ideologies to thrive, making it a fertile ground for recruitment. The group has also maintained close ties with Al-Qaeda, receiving ideological guidance and support. These connections have helped the TTP sustain its operations and expand its influence in the region. The group has also been responsible for numerous high-profile attacks within Pakistan, targeting civilians, security forces, and government installations. One of their most notorious attacks was the 2014 Peshawar school massacre, which resulted in the deaths of 145 people, including 132 children. This tragic event shocked the nation and the world, highlighting the brutal tactics employed by the TTP to further their agenda. This very real internal threat has forced Pakistan to take a more subtle approach to its relationship with the Taliban. Now, even though their history is not entirely a bed of roses, you would be right to ask why these two nations are about to go to war. To answer this, we must take a look at the root causes of the conflict between Pakistan and the Taliban. The ever-escalating tensions between the two sides are driven by a complex interplay of political, social, and economic factors. Let's examine them. Politically, the Pakistani government and military have long sought to exert influence over Afghanistan to ensure that it remains within Pakistan's sphere of influence. This has been a cornerstone of Pakistan's foreign policy, often referred to as the quest for strategic depth. The idea is to have a pro-Pakistan government in Kabul that can act as a buffer against Indian influence. The Taliban, with their hardline Islamist ideology, were seen as a reliable partner to achieve this goal. However, this political strategy has also created a paradox for Pakistan. While it has supported the Afghan Taliban to maintain influence in Afghanistan, it has also faced the domestic threat of the Taliban-Pakistan. Now, this militant group that shares ideological similarities with the Afghan Taliban, but operates against the Pakistani state, is wreaking havoc within the state. It feels like Pakistan, in trying to find allies against India, created its own enemy. Frustratingly, the Taliban has not assisted Pakistan, but instead has shown support for the TTP, something Pakistan views as a stab in the back. This has created some tension between the two nations. Furthermore, the ethnic dynamics in the region have also contributed to the conflict. Pashtuns are an ethnic group primarily residing in northwestern Pakistan and eastern and southern Afghanistan. They are seen as the historic founders of the Afghan kingdom, and it's no wonder that the Taliban's leadership and many of its fighters are Pashtuns. However, despite making up about a quarter of Pakistan's population, Pashtuns have faced significant segregation and discrimination. Historically, they have been marginalized and stereotyped, often unfairly associated with violence and militancy due to their presence in conflict-affected regions and their historical resistance to foreign rule. This has led to systemic discrimination in various areas of life, including social, economic, and political spheres. The situation for Pashtuns in Pakistan is extreme and deeply rooted. They have experienced racial profiling, arbitrary arrests, and even extrajudicial killings by security forces. These acts of discrimination and violence have fueled resentment and anger within the community. Despite their rich cultural traditions and significant contributions to the country, Pashtuns have struggled to achieve equal rights and opportunities. In recent years, the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, or PTM, has emerged as a powerful voice advocating for Pashtun rights. The PTM challenges these injustices and calls for accountability for past abuses. Their demands include an end to extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and harassment by security forces. The movement has garnered support from across the country and highlighted the plight of Pashtuns on a national and international stage. The PTM has been necessary because the discrimination faced by Pashtuns is not just limited to individual acts of violence or discrimination, but it is also reflected in broader systemic issues. For example, Pashtun regions have often been neglected in terms of development and infrastructure. This neglect has resulted in a lack of basic services, such as education and healthcare, which further perpetuates the cycle of poverty and marginalization. However, despite this peaceful approach, the PTM's efforts have been met with significant repression from the Pakistani government. In October 2024, the government banned the PTM, labeling it a proscribed organization and citing security concerns. This ban has allowed authorities to seal PTM offices, seize assets, and prohibit public advocacy, effectively silencing the movement. Such things have caused an uproar within that community and even among the Taliban. Because of this, the Pashtun ethnic group, which spans both sides of the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, has been a significant base of support for the Taliban. The Taliban's leadership has even often framed their struggle in terms of defending Pashtun interests against external forces. This ethnic solidarity has complicated efforts to isolate the Taliban, as they can draw on support from Pashtun communities on both sides of the border. By making this an ethnicity issue, the Taliban has tapped into a multi-generational support base that can allow fuel to their fire indefinitely. With issues that pull at the heartstrings, it's no wonder this issue of ethnic rights has increased tensions between the two nations. There are also some economic factors in the mix as well. Afghanistan is one of the world's largest producers of opium, and the Taliban have been deeply involved in the drug trade, using the proceeds to finance their insurgency. This drug trafficking by the Taliban has had severe implications for Pakistan, as much of this production finds its way into Pakistan, either for local consumption or as a transit route to other countries. The influx of drugs has fueled various social and economic problems in Pakistan. Drug addiction rates have risen, particularly among the youth, leading to a public health crisis. The availability of cheap and potent drugs has devastated many communities, contributing to crime and social instability. Moreover, the drug trade has also had a profound impact on Pakistan's security situation. The profits from drug trafficking have been used to fund militant activities, exacerbating the insurgency and violence in the region. The complicated connection between drugs and militancy has created a complex challenge for Pakistani authorities, who have to combat both the drug trade and the associated security threats. The porous border between Pakistan and Afghanistan has also made it difficult to control the flow of narcotics. Despite efforts to strengthen border security and conduct anti-narcotics operations, the scale of the problem remains significant. The drug trade has also strained relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan, with both countries blaming each other for not doing enough to curb the trafficking. Add to this mix the ideological factors that cannot be overlooked. The Taliban's hardline Islamist ideology has resonated with certain segments of Pakistani society, particularly in the border regions where they mostly operate. This ideological alignment has facilitated the Taliban's recruitment efforts and has created a base of support within Pakistan. The presence of radical madrasas, which are religious schools in Pakistan, has also played a role in spreading extremist ideologies and providing recruits for militant groups. It's not a stretch to say that Taliban ideology is infiltrating Pakistan, much to their disapproval. Lastly, the regional and international dimensions of the conflict have added further complexity. The rivalry between Pakistan and India has been a significant factor in Pakistan's support for the Taliban. Pakistan has sought to counter Indian influence in Afghanistan, fearing that a pro-India government in Kabul would encircle Pakistan. This regional rivalry has driven Pakistan to maintain ties with the Taliban as a strategic counterbalance to India, even though it does not always serve its best interests. You can even go so far as to say, in some ways, they have trapped themselves between two strong enemies. This has created a sense of entitlement for the Taliban and a defensive state for Pakistan, further adding to the hostilities. Moving to the world stage, internationally, the involvement of other powers, such as the United States, Russia, and China, has also influenced the conflict. The U.S. invasion of Afghanistan and subsequent military presence created a new dynamic in the region, with Pakistan playing a dual role as an ally of the U.S. and a supporter of the Taliban. Naturally, this didn't please anyone, and in certain spaces, the Taliban questioned Pakistani loyalty. The withdrawal of U.S. forces and the Taliban's return to power in 2021 then once again shifted the geopolitical landscape, with various powers having to navigate the new realities. These facts are just some of the key points that have been chipping at the block of friendship, breaking it down bit by bit. With the cracks in the relationship established, let's take a deeper look at how events unraveled, leading to the escalation into military action between Pakistan and the Taliban over several years. To begin with, the roots of the tension can be traced back to the inconsistent and often contradictory policies of Pakistan towards the Taliban. One of the key incidents that marked the escalation of tensions was the Pakistani military's operations against militant groups in its tribal areas, particularly in North Waziristan. These operations, launched under the banner of Operation Zarb-e-Azb in 2014 and later Operation Rad-ul-Fasad, were aimed at dismantling terrorist networks that posed a threat to Pakistan's internal security. We'll talk about some of these key operations later, but it's important to note that they carry great significance in the fracturing of relationships. The operations targeted both local militant groups, such as the Tehrik-e-Taliban-Pakistan, and foreign fighters, including those affiliated with the Afghan Taliban. The military operations disrupted the safe havens that these militant groups had established in the tribal areas, leading to a significant number of militant casualties and the dismantling of their infrastructure. However, it also led to the displacement of tens of thousands of civilians, creating a humanitarian crisis in the region. The military's actions were seen as necessary to restore law and order, but they also contributed to a growing resentment among the local population and militant groups. Ironically, the areas where resentment built up the most were the recruiting grounds of the TTP. Another critical factor in the escalation of tensions has been the shifting dynamics within the Taliban leadership. The death of Mullah Omar, the founder and leader of the Taliban in 2013, led to a leadership crisis within the group. The emergence of new leaders such as Mullah Akhtar Mansour and later Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzada brought about changes in the Taliban's strategy and approach. While some factions within the Taliban continued to maintain ties with Pakistan, others became more independent and assertive, leading to internal divisions and power struggles. The ideal relationship that Pakistan had worked hard to attain was buried with Omar, and with the rise of others came a less favorable, less debt-attached relationship. The Taliban's growing strength and territorial gains in Afghanistan over the years have also played a role in the escalation of tensions. As the Taliban expanded its control over Afghan territory, it became more confident and emboldened in its actions. This included cross-border attacks into Pakistan, targeting both military and civilian installations. These attacks were seen as retaliatory measures against Pakistan's military operations and perceived betrayals by Islamabad. While we're still talking about Afghanistan, it's critical to note that though they had their merits, as we've discussed, the US-Taliban peace talks, which culminated in the signing of the Doha Agreement in 2020, further complicated the situation. Pakistan played a crucial role in facilitating these talks, leveraging its influence over the Taliban to bring them to the negotiating table. However, the agreement, which outlined the withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan, also raised concerns in Pakistan about the potential resurgence of militant activity along its border. The withdrawal of US and NATO forces from Afghanistan in 2021 and the Taliban's rapid takeover of the country marked a significant turning point. While Pakistan publicly expressed support for a peaceful and stable Afghanistan, the Taliban's return to power has been characterized by attempts to consolidate power and implement their strict interpretation of Islamic law, which has led to tensions with neighboring countries, including and especially Pakistan. One of the most significant recent incidents that escalated tensions into military action was the cross-border attack by the Taliban on Pakistan security forces in 2022, leading to a series of violent confrontations. This escalation was triggered by Pakistani airstrikes targeting alleged Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan camps in Afghanistan's eastern Paktika province. These airstrikes were part of Pakistan's efforts to dismantle militant networks that were believed to be planning attacks on Pakistani soil. The Taliban's retaliation was swift and intense. They targeted several areas, including Gozgarhi, Mathasangar, Katraga, and Tari Mengal, using both light and heavy weapons. The attacks resulted in casualties on both sides, with at least 6 individuals killed and 17 others, including civilians, injured. The violence underscored the deep-seated animosity and distrust between the two sides, which had been building up over the years. The situation was further complicated by the Taliban's refusal to take action against the TTP, which continued to launch attacks within Pakistan. This refusal was a major point of contention between Islamabad and Kabul, with Pakistan repeatedly calling on the Taliban to fulfill their commitments under the Doha Agreement to prevent the use of Afghan soil for terrorist activities against other countries. Those same border clashes and retaliatory attacks highlighted the fragile nature of Pakistan-Taliban relations. Despite their historical ties and shared interests, the two sides found themselves increasingly at odds. The Taliban's alignment with nationalist rhetoric and their efforts to establish themselves as a legitimate government in Afghanistan significantly reduced their reliance on Pakistan, leading to increased tensions and hostilities with their former benefactor. As if all that chaos isn't enough, the role of other regional actors such as India and Iran has also contributed to the escalation of tensions. India's growing influence in Afghanistan, particularly its economic and political support for the Afghan government, has been a source of concern for Pakistan. Islamabad fears that a pro-India government in Kabul would undermine its strategic interests and encircle it from both the eastern and western borders. Similarly, Iran's complex relationship with the Taliban, characterized by both cooperation and rivalry, adds another layer of complexity to the regional dynamics. From Pakistan's position, it seems like it is being encircled by enemies. This has rung especially true as in the past few days, the border regions between Pakistan and Afghanistan have become the epicenter of violent exchanges. This area, characterized by its rugged terrain and porous boundaries, has historically been a hotspot for militant activities and cross-border skirmishes. The recent clashes were triggered by a series of provocative actions and retaliatory measures, with each side testing the resolve and capabilities of the other. The first significant incident occurred when the Taliban launched a series of attacks on Pakistani military outposts along the border. These attacks were meticulously planned and executed, targeting key installations and attempting to disrupt the military's defensive positions. The Taliban's strategy was to create chaos and disarray, leveraging their knowledge of the local terrain and their guerrilla warfare tactics. They employed a mix of small arms fire, rocket-propelled grenades, and improvised explosive devices to inflict maximum damage and casualties. The Pakistani military responded swiftly and decisively. Troops stationed at the border outposts engaged the Taliban fighters in intense firefights, utilizing their superior firepower and tactical training. The clashes were fierce and protracted, with both sides sustaining casualties. The Pakistani forces, equipped with advanced weaponry and surveillance technology, managed to repel several Taliban assaults, but not without significant cost. Pakistan's military has killed more than 15 militants and inflicted significant losses on Taliban fighters. Pakistan's military itself has suffered losses as well, and in 2024 alone, the military has reported 383 soldiers and 925 militants killed in various clashes. In response to these attacks, Pakistan launched a series of retaliatory airstrikes targeting Taliban hideouts and supply lines within Afghan territory. These airstrikes were aimed at disrupting the Taliban's operational capabilities and sending a clear message of deterrence. The Pakistan Air Force deployed fighter jets and drones, conducting precision strikes on known Taliban positions. The airstrikes inflicted substantial damage on the Taliban's infrastructure, but they also led to collateral damage, affecting civilian areas and increasing the humanitarian toll. The Taliban also reports that 46 people have been killed by Pakistan airstrikes as well, most of them being civilians. The initial clashes were not just about territorial control. They also had a significant psychological dimension. Both sides aimed to assert their dominance and break the morale of their adversaries. The Taliban's ability to carry out coordinated attacks on Pakistani soil demonstrated their operational strength and resilience. For Pakistan, the successful execution of airstrikes showcased their military prowess and willingness to take decisive action to protect their sovereignty. The clashes also highlighted the complexities of the regional dynamics. The border regions are inhabited by tribal communities with deep-rooted connections on both sides. These communities often find themselves caught in the crossfire, suffering from displacement and loss of livelihoods. As the initial clashes unfolded, both Pakistan and the Taliban have been engaged in a war of narratives. Each side is seeking to control the information space, shaping public perception and garnering support. The Taliban's media outlets and social media channels disseminated propaganda, highlighting their resistance against what they termed as foreign aggression by Pakistan. They portray themselves as defenders of Afghan sovereignty and Islamic values, rallying support from sympathetic factions within Afghanistan and beyond. On the other hand, Pakistan's government and military leveraged their communication platforms to present their actions as a necessary response to cross-border terrorism. Official statements emphasized Pakistan's commitment to defending its territorial integrity and combating militant threats. The government called on the international community to recognize the provocations by the Taliban and support Pakistan's efforts to maintain regional stability. As the initial clashes continue, both Pakistan and the Taliban are adapting their strategies. The Pakistani military increased its presence along the border, fortifying defensive positions and conducting regular patrols. Intelligence operations were intensified to identify and neutralize Taliban infiltrators and supply routes. The military also enhanced coordination with local law enforcement agencies and tribal leaders to improve security and gather actionable intelligence. The Taliban, on their part, have been seeking to exploit the challenging terrain and their local knowledge to launch hit-and-run attacks. They have focused on ambushes, roadside bombings, and small-scale assaults to inflict casualties and maintain pressure on Pakistani forces. The Taliban's decentralized command structure allows them to be flexible and adaptive, quickly shifting tactics in response to Pakistani military actions. These initial clashes have also set the tone for what would become a long and gruesome conflict. With the devastation that these past battles brought about, it's critical to examine how war-ready both these nations are. Understanding these preparations offers a glimpse into the twists of modern warfare and the strategic moves each party is making to secure their positions. Let's start with Pakistan. Amidst the ongoing conflict and the growing threat from the Taliban, Pakistan has been actively modernizing its military capabilities. The country's defense budget reached $6.15 billion this year, driven by the need to maintain a credible deterrence posture against regional threats. This is a 15% increase from the previous year, all done to reflect the vulnerable position that the nation finds itself in, and to increase the capabilities of its already powerful military. At the 2024 World Defense Show in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan unveiled the Fatah-2, an advanced guided rocket artillery system, representing a significant improvement over its predecessor, the Fatah-1, with an increased range of up to 400 kilometers. This advanced guided artillery system features sophisticated navigation technologies and the ability to fire both salvo and non-salvo modes. It will no doubt prove a great asset on the battlefield against the Taliban. The modernization of Pakistan's Air Force is another critical aspect of their military preparedness. The acquisition and co-production of JF-17 Thunderfighter jets with China have significantly bolstered their aerial combat capabilities. These jets, especially the advanced Block 3 variant, come equipped with state-of-the-art radar systems and precision-guided munitions, enhancing Pakistan's ability to conduct effective airstrikes. Alongside the JF-17s, Pakistan has upgraded its fleet of F-16s, incorporating improved avionics and weaponry to maintain air superiority. The military has also been strengthening air defense systems, ensuring they can intercept any aerial threats posed by the Taliban. The developments aren't just in the skies, though. Pakistan is also focusing on upgrading its ground forces with new artillery systems and armored vehicles. This includes modernizing their infantry units and enhancing anti-tank capabilities to counter potential Taliban attacks. Cyber warfare and intelligence gathering have become crucial components of Pakistan's military strategy. They are investing in advanced surveillance and reconnaissance technologies to monitor Taliban movements and gather actionable intelligence. By enhancing its cyber capabilities, Pakistan aims to protect its critical infrastructure and disrupt Taliban communication networks. By the looks of things, it seems Pakistan is ready. On the other side, the Taliban has not been sitting in its hands. They have been consolidating power in Afghanistan since the withdrawal of US and NATO forces. They are known for their effective guerrilla warfare tactics, which have enabled them to gain control over key regions, and would no doubt be useful against Pakistan. The rugged terrain of Afghanistan provides a strategic advantage for these tactics, allowing the Taliban to launch surprise attacks and evade conventional military forces if invaded. The Taliban's access to a wide range of weapons and equipment, including those left behind by departing US and NATO forces, has also bolstered their combat capabilities. Approximately $7 billion of military equipment the US transferred to the Afghan government over 16 years was left behind in Afghanistan after the US completed its withdrawal from the country. This has no doubt given them quite a boost. Intelligence operations also play a vital role in the Taliban's strategy. They conduct extensive surveillance to gather information about Pakistani military movements and identify potential targets. Human intelligence, along with surveillance technologies, might be the trump card that will enable them to anticipate and counter Pakistani actions effectively. The Taliban also have a few cards up their sleeve that they use indiscriminately. For example, propaganda and psychological operations are integral to the Taliban's efforts to influence public opinion and rally support. They use social media and traditional communication channels to spread their messages, portraying themselves as defenders of Afghan sovereignty, as they did during the Civil War. Now that they are up against a foreign enemy, this will be even more effective. This propaganda aims to undermine Pakistani efforts and garner sympathy from both local and international audiences. With so much at stake, the international community has been trying to avoid a war as much as possible. The United States has long expressed deep concern over the escalating violence, emphasizing the potential threat it poses to regional stability. American officials have, for the longest time, urged both Pakistan and the Taliban to engage in meaningful dialogue to find a peaceful solution. The U.S. remains committed to supporting Afghanistan and Pakistan in their efforts to combat terrorism and promote peace. This support includes providing intelligence, military aid, and diplomatic backing, underscoring the strategic importance of the region to U.S. interests. China has also weighed in, calling for restraint and emphasizing the need for dialogue between the two parties. The Chinese government has highlighted the importance of maintaining regional stability and preventing further escalation. China has even offered to mediate peace talks, positioning itself as a key player with significant influence over both Pakistan and Afghanistan. This move underlines China's growing role in international diplomacy and its strategic interest in ensuring stability along its borders. The European Union has expressed its deep concern over the humanitarian impact of the conflict, calling for an immediate ceasefire and urging both sides to engage in dialogue. The EU's stance is driven by a commitment to human rights and the rule of law, reflecting its broader foreign policy objectives. The EU has also stressed the need for international cooperation to address the root causes of the conflict and promote long-term stability. This emphasis on a collaborative approach highlights the interconnected nature of global security and the importance of collective efforts to resolve such crises. Other neighboring countries, including India and Iran, have expressed their own concerns over the escalating violence and its implications for regional stability. These nations have called for de-escalation and emphasized the importance of dialogue to address the conflict and prevent further humanitarian crises. Their reactions are shaped by their strategic interests and regional dynamics, as instability in Afghanistan and Pakistan has direct implications for their security and economic interests. Both countries have offered to support peace efforts, highlighting the regional desire for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. When you take time to look at the potential outcomes of the conflict between Pakistan and the Taliban, you can start to understand how bad the situation is. Pakistan has seen a surge in militant attacks, particularly in regions like Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. The Pakistani military's airstrikes in Afghanistan targeting the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan have led to heightened tensions and retaliatory threats from the Afghan Taliban. These actions have heightened the already strained relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan, with frequent clashes along the disputed Durand Line. The escalation has also caused considerable disruption to the lives of civilians, resulting in casualties, displacement, and a general sense of instability that permeates the region. Looking at the long-term implications, the conflict poses a substantial threat to regional stability. Prolonged instability in Pakistan could empower the TTP, allowing it to gain more strength and influence. This instability is likely to spill over into neighboring countries, adversely affecting economic conditions and geopolitical dynamics. Economically, Pakistan might face further deterioration due to increased military expenditures and the financial burdens of counterterrorism efforts. As of the third quarter of 2024, Pakistan's total external debt was about $133 billion, which is an all-time high. To deal with this, more than 40% of the federal budget goes towards debt servicing, leaving little for development. Any further strain on this could be disastrous for the nation's economy. Outside of national issues, the broader regional economy could suffer as well, with trade routes and investment flows being disrupted. Geopolitically, the conflict could alter alliances and provoke shifts in power dynamics. Countries within the region and beyond might reevaluate their strategies and relationships, navigating the complexities brought about by this conflict. Pakistan's relations with other nations, particularly its neighbors, could be strained as they grapple with the repercussions of the ongoing violence. We never love to report on such dark issues, but this conflict needs to be brought to light as it shows the fragility of peace and alliances in geopolitics. The TTP seems to have been emboldened by the Taliban's success in Afghanistan and is now focusing its efforts on destabilizing Pakistan. This shows the interlinked nature of Taliban factions across the region and their potential to influence each other's tactics and strategies. The path to a safer and stable Middle East is not going to be easy, but stopping this war would be a great big step in that direction. If that doesn't happen, we could be seeing a new arena for another bloody and dangerous war. But this story is far from over. The dynamics are constantly evolving, and perhaps they can evolve to a more peaceful resolution.